Hi, I'm Ray from the Radio Workshop, where I repair and restore vintage valve radios from the 1940s. My amateur radio call sign is Golf 4 November Sierra Juliet. Welcome to yet another podcast. Hopefully you've listened to part 1 of GWM Radio, Portland Road, Worthing, so you won't need me to explain the whole thing. This is about GWM Radio and Les, the shop owner, or one of the shop owners. There were 3 altogether, but Les was the main man in the shop. I was chatting to a group of people in the shop once, and I think there were 3 or 4 of us there. We were just chatting, and Les came over, and he said, "Have you lot got any money?" And we looked at each other. Yes, we have. Yeah, why? And he said, "Well, either spend it in here or get out and stop wasting space." You can't say that to customers in your shop, but Les could. He did know us, he knew us, so it wasn't too bad, but that was just his way, If you're not going to spend your money in here, then get out. He was a hilarious chap. I just loved every second that I was in that shop. He had a till in the shop, but I used to joke with him about that. I used to say his till was his back pocket, where he kept the money, but he did actually have a till. Which reminds me, once I went in there and I said, "How much is that to me, Les?" It was another little power supply. I was always buying power supplies, I don't know why. I remember it well. This was a nice bench power supply, sort of 0 to 15 volts, sort of, 5 amps, something like that. And he said, "It's £15, so to you I'll knock the VAT off, £10. I paid him and I said, "By the way, Les, since when has VAT been 50%? And he said, "Since just now." That was not bad. I felt quite pleased about that purchase. Got a £5 off. Another time I was in there, I saw this beautiful Marconi Atalanta receiver. Do you remember the Atalanta? Not Atlantic or Atlantis. Atalanta Marconi. Look it up. Lovely piece of kit. Really nice receiver. What was it? Kind of 30 kilohertz to 30 megs. Something like that. They were used on ships. In fact, a very good friend of mine was a radio officer in the Merchant Navy, and he remembers them well on board the ships. Now the thing is, they were run from DC mains. A lot of the ships in the early days were DC mains. So what Les did, he ordered some mains transformers. He had them specially made for these receivers. I don't know how many he'd bought. He must have had a good few to have mains transformers, manufactured specifically for that job. So what they did in the workshop, they built mains power supplies into these receivers. So I asked him how much these receivers were, and he said again, "I'll knock the VAT off, £100 to you." So they were £117.50, because the VAT in those days was 17.5%. I thought it rather odd that the total was exactly £117.50, and he knocked the VAT off to get it down to around 100. But there we are, that was Les. I paid him for that. That was a lovely receiver. I actually lost it. I moved house and I left it in the attic. I think it must have been about a year later that I wondered where it was. The people that moved into the house, they never contacted me. Perhaps they hadn't been up into the loft, or perhaps they just dumped it thinking it was rubbish. Great shame that. I do miss that receiver, although it weighed a ton and it was huge. It used, if I remember rightly, B7G valves. Quite a nice piece of kit, and probably worth a few shillings today, so yeah, it's a shame I lost that one. I wandered out the back one morning where people weren't allowed to go, and there was Les out there sitting on a box, and he was sitting in front of one of those sort of pot-belly stove things with a sort of chimney thing on it. And I said, "Les, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm burning the insulation off old transformers." What he was doing was getting these transformers, putting them in the fire, so all the insulation and everything would burn off, so he could sell it as scrap metal. And he's sitting there, fag in his mouth, sitting in front of this stove thing, feeding transformers into the front of it, and there's smoke going up everywhere. I often used to wander out the back, and there was one time in particular I'll never forget. There was this huge transmitter. It was a 19-inch rack unit, and it was a large thing. And I said to Les, "What's this all about? How much is this?" "Oh no," he said, "no, I'm pulling that one to bits." He got his lad there. They used to take things to bits, so then Les could sell the meters, the knobs, the transformers, the valves, all in bits. He said, "I'd get a lot more money for all the parts that I can for the unit as a lump. So I wanted this unit. It was, what was I can't remember exactly, probably something like 2 to 12 megs transmitter. Goodness knows where it had come from. And I said, no, come on, Les, I want to buy this. Anyway, he wouldn't sell it to me, which was a great shame. So I said, look, how much are the bits? I said, roughly add up the bits, because I want it complete. Anyway, he came out with some ridiculous figure. And because I kept pestering him, I went back the following day. And I said, how much is that transmitter, Les? And he said, no, it's too late, it's all in bits. Well, I went out the back, and it wasn't at all in bits. It was still together. So he came out, you're not allowed out here. Off out of it. Anyway, in the end, I got it. I think I paid him £50 or something. He said, take that, put it in your car, and off out of it. There were a couple of 813 valves in the transmitter PA. I don't know what sort of power it ran, but I put a couple of 1,000 volts on these 813s. I think there should have been 1,600. I can't remember. And I fired the thing up, and good grief, did it go. I tried it out on 40 metres and I was getting fantastic reports, only on a dipole, and it was absolutely incredible. I forget what the modulation was. I can't remember. I don't think it was anode and screen mod. I'm not sure what it was. Probably something dreadful like the 52 set control grid modulation. But that was quite a beast. I don't know what happened to it in the end. I think I sold it to someone. Unfortunately, I don't even remember what make it was. I think it was an army thing. Army surplus, but there we are. I wish I'd kept that. I wish I'd kept all the gear I got from Les at the shop. Mind you, I'd need a warehouse to put it in. I just bought stuff from that shop every week. I don't know where I put it all. I think I sort of rotated. I'd buy something, play around with it for a few months, and then sell it, move it on, and then buy something else or whatever. I remember I had a shed absolutely full of stuff. Plus, when I lived at home, my parents' loft, that was full of radio gear. I don't know. I remember when I finally left home and got married, there was all this stuff up in their loft that they wanted cleared out. So I had to do a massive sale, contacted all the local amateurs and whoever, and sold a lot of it off that way. I remember the B44 VHF radio I had. That was fantastic. Got that going on 70.26 megs AM, the 4 meter amateur band. That was good. And instead of the vibrator pack in there, what we used to do with the B44s was take out the vibrator, put a couple of power transistors in there, make it into an inverter. It was a very simple job. You could use the same transformer and it was just far more efficient. You could hear the inverter squealing. Much better than those old vibrator things that drew a lot of current. Do you remember those Bakelite crystals for transmitter oscillators, that sort of thing? They were quite large, made by GEC, I believe. Used to come in a cardboard box, a small box. Well, Les had in the shop a huge tea chest, absolutely full of these. And of course, all the medium wave pirates, they'd rummage around. You could never get to the bottom of the box. You couldn't even get down more than a few inches, to be honest, because we'd have to take them all out of the box. But there were always people rummaging around in this box, including myself. And I found a crystal once. I couldn't believe it. 1.2 something megs, which was medium wave, of course. I forget, 1.23 was it? Something like that. So I was delighted. I went and bought that, but there was someone watching me. I don't know who he was. I never did find out who he was. He was watching various people. And every now and then he'd say, what frequency are you after? What is it you're looking for? What's that one you've got? So everyone had to be a bit careful in case he was some kind of GPO spy, a pirate catching spy. You had to be very careful. You're never quite sure who's who in those days. That was the thing of the 1960s. Everyone was building transmitters. Everyone was after crystals, whether they're legit radio amateurs or pirates. They're all after crystals. Of course, VFOs were scarce, but every now and then an ex-army or whatever VFO would come into the shop, and of course it was snapped up as soon as it went onto the shelf. I bought a Reese Mace transmitter from Les. That was a lovely piece of kit. That had a VFO. In the PA it had three, those miniature 807s, 5.2 something. You know the ones, the miniature 807s. 3 of those in parallel in the PA, and a couple in push-pull for the modulation. Anode and screen mod, beautiful little mod tranny in there. Really nice piece of kit. The thing, I think it went up to about 22 megs, but the thing was it went down to something like 1.5 megs, 1.4 something, 1.5, which, as you will know, is medium wave. So that was quite handy to just plug your line out from your tape recorder into the mic socket on the front of the Reese Mace transmitter, and you're on the air. And actually the audio quality wasn't too bad at all for music on medium wave. Not that I ever tried it on medium wave, of course. I'm just saying that that's what someone possibly could have done. Good grief, perish the thought to think that I'd do something like that. But of course in those days, things like the Reese Mace transmitter, the big transmitter I bought with the 813s in, all this stuff was freely available. Not just me, everyone would spend hours modifying this stuff, perhaps taking it all to bits to build something else. Just fantastic days, fantastic times. It's such a shame those days have gone. I know now we've got all the modern stuff. We've got these little Bofang radios for 2 meters and 70 sems. You can chat on those. A lot of people are using those to pirate with. They just pass them out to their family members. All go on one frequency. It doesn't matter what the frequency is. They don't care where. And they can all chat to each other. So that's the downside of it. But I do miss those good old days where you could buy huge lumps of equipment with massive transformers and huge valves in that need thousands of volts. Great stuff. Les called me over once. He beckoned me with his finger. He said, "Follow me." So I followed him and we went to this sort of side store place. I think I mentioned it in the last podcast, full of 19 sets and goodies. Now he knew that I had a 52 set receiver because he sold it to me a couple of years previously. And he actually said, "Do you remember I sold you that 52 set receiver?" I said, "Yes." I said, "How did you remember that?" He said, "Oh, I remember everything." He said, "Anyway, come and see what I've got for you." And we went to the back of this store place and there was the matching transmitter. Now that had an 813 valve in it. Beautiful piece of equipment. And I looked at it, it was in lovely condition. And I said, "Go on, Les, how much?" Because that would have been perfect to go with my 52 set receiver. He said, "It's yours, take it." And I said, What? Take it? What do you mean?" He said, "Go on, you're a good customer of mine." I said, "That's worth a lot of money." He said, "Go on, take it, just get out with it." He said, "You've spent thousands here over the years, you must have done, so go on, off you go." I was amazed, it was incredible. I put it in the boot of my car before he changed his mind. He must have been in a particularly good mood that day. Of course, I got that home, straight out into my shack, set it all up with the receiver, and that went like crazy. That was absolutely beautiful, that transmitter. That had an 813 in it. Again, like the other transmitter, I put a couple of thousand volts on the anode, which a friend of mine who was in the shack at the time, he just leaned on the top of the chassis, and the 2000 volts plus a load of RF burnt his arm, threw him across the workshop. So that wasn't so good. He laughed afterwards, but at the time I was a bit worried. I thought he was a goner. But what a beautiful transmitter, sitting next to the matching receiver. I was just over the moon, couldn't believe my luck. So Les was a really nice chap. He was firm but fair, and I thought that was a really nice gesture to give me that. The first contact I had with that was on 40 metres, a chap up in Cromer in Norfolk. I'll never forget that. He gave me a fantastic signal report. And he said, "Where are you?" I said, "Right down the south coast near Brighton." And he couldn't believe it. But he did say, "Can you turn the lawnmower off? There's a big fan on the front, carbon brush DC motor fan on the front." And it was whirring like a lawnmower. So I turned that off. The 813 didn't need cooling anyway. Not for the short overs I was having with this chap. Maybe if it was on constantly on AM, continuous carrier, especially with a couple of thousand volts, then possibly, well, even then though, that little fan wouldn't have done much. There we are. I use that transmitter and the receiver, the 52 set, the whole setup. I used that for many, many years. Again, I wish I'd kept that. But before I forget, in the last podcast, someone commented about the seagulls in the background. Yes, I live very near to the sea. I'm only a mile away. In this one, you're going to hear sparrows because for some reason, I've been invaded by these little sparrows. They're all over the place, all outside the window, all chirping and tweeting like mad. Just going back to the Reese Mace transmitter, I said about miniature 807s. I've just looked them up. 5B/255M. That's what they were, 5B/255M. Little valves based on the 807. They were lovely valves, really nice. I think they had the same characteristics as the 807 valves as well. I've got some 807s somewhere. I did have some 813s. I think I sold those. But I know I've got some 807s somewhere, but not the miniature types. I wish I'd kept that Reese Mace transmitter. Probably best that I haven't got it. I'd be playing Jimi Hendrix on medium wave. I remember Les looking over his shoulder, looking round to see who was in the shop, and he whispered, it's funny, he whispered to me, "Don't go on the air this weekend on 6.6 megs. That was the pirate frequency, known all over the UK. People having a chat on shortwave, 6.6 megs, Echo Charlie, it was known as. So I said, "Why is that, Les?" He said, "It doesn't matter why, just keep off 6.6 megs this weekend. Don't go on the air at all." And I said, "Oh, okay, fair enough." And he said, "If I were you, I'd hide your gear." Okay, I thought that's a bit odd, but I did as he said. I had my 19 set all set up in the shack. I took that along with some other gear and plonked it all around a friend's house, a friend who wasn't interested in radio. And I expected a raid, but nothing happened. But I did hear some time later that the GPO had had a bit of a purge on pirates. They'd visited a few known pirates, and I think most of them only got warned, but I think one did end up in court. I didn't know the chap, but he did end up in court. I remember reading about it in the paper. I think they took his gear away and he was fined. I can't remember how much it was. It wasn't a lot, like £25 or something like that. But Les had obviously got word of this operation, that was the Operation Pirate, that was happening that weekend. So he was good enough to warn me. But yeah, they didn't visit me anyway, so it wasn't a problem. I eventually got the gear back. I remember waiting 2 or 3 weeks before I actually got the gear back from my friend and installed it back in the shack where it belonged. When CB arrived in the UK, it became massive. Was it 70s, 80s? It was really massive. So Les and GWM Radio didn't miss out on that. He sold brand new rigs, and he also did repairs. They would take on repairs in the workshop. Everyone wanted their radios tuned up, so that must have been pretty lucrative. I used to tune up CB radios for these youngsters. I'd charge them a couple of pounds, just go through the alignment very quickly, make sure you got maximum out of the transmitter. They loved it. There was a so-called rig doctor. Do you remember rig doctors? There was one that lived near me. What he would do, he'd take people's CB radios, he'd ruin them, then people would bring them to me to put them right. Happy days. But Les did well on the CB stuff. I remember them all in the shop window. I remember a lady going into the shop. She must have been in her 60s, early 70s even. And she said, "I want to buy a CB radio." And Les was there. And he said, "What do you want that for?" She said, "I want to talk to young men on the radio." He sold her one. She had to have an aerial as well, of course. I think someone was going to sort that out for her. She wanted to talk to young men on the radio. There we are, nothing wrong with that. Les was actually on CB radio long after he'd retired. He was on the radio, and I used to speak to him most mornings from my shack at home. He didn't live that far from me, and we'd have a chat most mornings. He was getting on, I forget how old he was then, but he really was getting on a bit. But it was nice talking to him on the radio. Happy days. I'm always saying that, as you probably realise. That expression came from Les. That's where I got it from. On the CB, he was always saying, "Happy days, happy days." Les Grout, GWM Radio, Portland Road, Worthing. They were happy days. End of an era. Sadly, it's all gone. Of course, there's no call for that stuff anymore. Who wants massive army surplus transmitters that possibly cover medium wave? People don't want it anymore. Only the odd sort of nerd like myself. I don't think the shop would work now. If it was where it was, exactly as it was, I don't think they'd have very many customers at all. Things have moved on so much. There'd be no call for big old capacitors, big old valves, army surplus gear. There we are, Les Grout, happy days. Thanks for listening. Bye bye for now.